Today's webinar will start with an overview of the grant funding mechanisms available through the product definition arm of the Catalyze program, which is presented by Diana Severynse-Stevens, who leads the Catalyze program from the side of the Coordinating Center. Following Diana's presentation, we welcome two scientific review officers from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, Kristen Goltry and Manoj Valyavital, who are here to help you understand the grantsmanship involved in tailoring your product definition application to Catalyze. Also, before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording as well as the presentation slides will be available on our website, NHLBICatalyze.org, by early next week. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn the meeting over to Diana.
Thanks, Marissa. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So the vision for Catalyze was to develop a program that could potentially decrease timelines, cost, and improve the success rate for developing novel products for the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders. Catalyze provides funding, education, and technical support to investigators in the program with the focus on milestone-driven progress designed to help overcome barriers that exist for investigators in technology development. Next slide. So the Catalyze program supports products that are in early development through preclinical stages and in some cases early clinical evaluation. So early stage projects identified as product definition are shown in this figure as activities in the light blue, and projects in preclinical development have advanced into activities shown in the darker blue. There can be some overlap in these two phases of the program because some of the more advanced product definition projects may be engaged in preclinical activities. However, this breakdown of activities should help you identify whether your project is a better fit for product definition support or whether it's a better fit for preclinical services component of Catalyze. Next slide. So regardless of the phase of the Catalyze program or the type of product under development in Catalyze, the Coordinating Center has a wide array of technical experts available to support all projects. In addition to technical support such as chemistry, toxicology, regulatory, or engineering, the Catalyze Coordinating Center can also provide commercialization support, including landscape or market evaluation, to help awardees develop a commercialization strategy. Next slide. So this slide provides a comparison of the product definition award versus preclinical services. So product definition projects are supported through an R61 or R33 grant that's awarded to the applicant, whereas preclinical services are provided through RTI, but do not typically provide funds directly to the applicant. When preclinical services are requested, such as a toxicology study or manufacturing, RTI will coordinate this work with a vendor who will complete the work for the awardee. The application process for product definition versus preclinical is also different. So for product definition support, a grant proposal is submitted through grants.gov and is reviewed through the grant review system. For preclinical services, there's a two-step application process, and both the expression of interest or EOI form and the full application are completed online through the Catalyze website. The EOI is open to all applicants, but only a subset of those who submit the EOI will be invited to submit a full application. Both the product definition proposal and the preclinical application have special requirements listed on this slide, but more information about the application process and the requirements for each service can be found on the catalyze.org website. We're currently in the middle of a pre-application cycle with full applications actually completing review this month. The next preclinical application cycle is anticipated in the fall of 2023, depending on the availability of funds. whereas the next product definition application deadline is July 21st. But if you miss the July deadline, you can apply during the next cycle with the deadline of November 21st. Next slide. So my final slide shows the 5 product definition grant opportunities that are currently available. So this information is also available on the Catalyze website, and Kristen and Manoj will go over the requirements for these opportunities during the second part of the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, here we are, the second part of the webinar. So I'm Kristen Galtree.
I'm Manoj Vallevital.
Right, and we are scientific review officers in the Office of Scientific Review at NHLBI. We are not part of the Center for Scientific Review here at NIH. Since Catalyze is an NHLBI program, we review it here within NHLBI in our office. Next slide. So as was mentioned, there are 5 separate RFAs, or requests for applications, associated with the Catalyze program. And I've separated out the Enabling Technologies and Transformative Platforms RFA from the Catalyze Product Definition for small molecules and biologics, and devices, diagnostics, and assay development. Out of the 5 RFAs, 2 of them are what we call biphasic. So they are R61 is phase 1 and R33 is phase 2. And R61 you can look at as feasibility, establishing feasibility. Or if your project is far enough along, you can go straight to the R33 phase mechanism. So I just want to point out that this webinar is not a substitute for you reading the RFAs and all of the application instructions and becoming very familiar with that. But we do hope to highlight some of the things that will help you have a successful application submission and review. And as we'll get into detail later, incomplete, non-compliant, or non-responsive applications may be returned to you without review. And so we want to avoid that. I'll just do a quick outline of what we're going to talk about. I'll start off taking you through an RFA layout in general and looking at things that are you should pay particular attention to, things to look for. And then we're going to discuss the Catalyze RFAs more specifically. And then near the end, we'll briefly discuss what happens after you submit your application, the review of the applications, and some of the common comments we have heard from reviewers over the last 20 or so review meetings we've had for Catalyze. And then we'll close discussing who you should contact at different phases of your application and review process, and hopefully take any questions that you have. Next slide. So this is part of the Know Your RFA. Part 1 of the RFA is always your overview information. You can see the participating organizations for the RFA and the components. And for the Catalyze, NHLBI is the only participating organization within NIH. Of course, you have the title, the announcement type, the quick purpose, the key dates and related notices, among other things. I want you to note, we'll kind of be going back and forth, but FOA is a funding opportunity announcement and is currently being replaced by NOFO, which is a notice of funding opportunity. So in the RFA you're reading, it says FOA still, but it will be phased out and turn into NOFO. So if you hear NOFO, it's the same as FOA. So next slide. So I wanted to have you pay particular attention to reviewing the related notices. So this is just a screenshot of a funding opportunity announcement, an RFA, and you'll see that there's a category called related notices. And these are things that you should really pay attention to. A lot of times it's skipped over. One of the notices that's on all of the Catalyze RFAs is this OD 23-012. And that is telling you that there's a new set of forms, Forms H for the grant application, and there are changes in the instructions that are now available. And I want to go over what it says briefly. So next slide. So in this related notice, saying that there are new grant application instructions available, there are also related announcements in there. So you can keep going to find all the related things. But most of the related announcements talk about a new policy for data management and sharing. And the purpose of this new policy is to promote the management and sharing of scientific data generated from NIH-funded or conducted research. Next slide. And so this announcement, OD 2113, is the final NIH policy for data management and sharing. And you can read through the whole notice if you would like. Briefly, previously we had a resource sharing plan as part of your application. And that included data sharing, model organism sharing, and genomic data sharing. And with the new forms and the new policies, we now have two separate plans. So you will have to write a resource sharing plan if you do have model organisms or research tools that should be shared. And that is part of the peer review process. And then you have a separate attachment called the data management and sharing plan. And that includes data sharing and genomic data sharing. And that, although it is part of your application and as a requirement, we review that internally at NHLBI. So peer reviewers will not see that. So that is one thing I wanted you to be aware of. Next slide. So in Know Your RFA Part 2 is the full text of the announcement, which pretty much takes up the rest of the RFA. And there are 8 sections in Part 2. And I'm in this webinar going to focus on 4 of them, although we want you to be familiar with all of them. Section 1 is a funding opportunity description. Section 4 is the application and submission information. Section 5 is the application review information. And Section 7 will have the agency contacts that you can talk to. And one of the overall things I'd like you to think about when you're looking at the RFA is paying attention to the words must or required. Those are things we're going to be looking for in your application. And if they aren't there, you may run a risk of having your application returned without peer review. Next slide. So in Section 1, the funding opportunity description, you're going to see specific research objectives and the scope of the FOA. You're also going to see a section on responsive technologies and scientific scope. And then there's a section on non-responsive projects. So you want to look through that and see how your project fits in there. And at this point, you are strongly encouraged to contact the scientific research staff that are listed in Section 7 of the RFA. And there you can discuss your potential research projects prior to creating and submitting your application and get their input on where they think you should apply, where your project fits. Next slide. This section also has special requirements for the FOA. And it under special requirements is listed the milestones. Milestones is something that's not typical for an R01 grant, for example, a basic research grant. We're looking for milestones that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And these milestones allow us to assess your progress during the award period. Specific aims or a list of activities is not considered milestones. And for the phased awards, you would have an R61 set of milestones and an R33 set of milestones. And your progress to R33 depends on if you have reached your R61 milestones. So your milestones will be an important component to your application. The timeline, of course, will incorporate your milestones, and the specific goals, feasibility milestones should be clear and complete. Next slide. And to tie this all together is the project management component, where we're asking you to describe your project management processes so that we can assess the progress of the project. And we are asking each applicant to identify a team member that will be responsible for the project management. And then the Catalyze Coordinating Center that was described can also help provide support for your project management. Next slide. Okay, section 4 of the RFA is your application and submission information. Under section 2 is the content and form of application submission, and it includes, among other things, your page limitations, your instructions for the application submission, other project information, which can include other attachments that are required, describes the budget, what should be in the budget and the budget justification, and then the research plan and what should be involved there, the part of the research plan. Next slide. So I wanted to here focus on the budget. The budget pages are for funds that you are requesting from the federal government. Some of the RFAs ask for matching funds. And if the matching funds are a requirement for your RFA, those funds and description of the funds should be included only in the budget justification, not on the actual budget pages. So just to clarify that, and it's described in the RFA that way. There is, based on the new Forms H and the data management sharing plan, the budget also now will include any funds for data management and sharing plan. And I also want to have a special note to small business applicants, because we've seen this coming through in small business grants like SBIR, you're allowed a 7% fee. But in the Catalyze program here at NIH, we don't accept the 7% fee, so you don't put that into your budget. Next slide. Section 5 is important and often overlooked. It's the application review information. And under section 1 of this, or number 1 of this, is the criteria. Only the review criteria described in this section will be considered in the review process. Applications submitted to the NIH in support of the NIH mission are evaluated for scientific and technical merit through the NIH peer review system. And you want to look at this section, and that way you will know what the reviewers are going to be looking for, and you can write your application to address those. Next slide. So the application review information described in section 5, there are 3 sections. There are scored review criteria, significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. These criteria get individual scores. And they are common to all of the research grants that NIH has. However, in our RFA and our FOA, we have specific questions that are added in them, pertaining specifically to the Catalyze program. And so the reviewers will be looking at those questions and looking to see if our application is addressing those questions. There is another section called additional review criteria. This information does factor into your overall score that you will get at the end of the review process, but they are not individually scored. And you want to make sure you address all the human subjects, invertebrate animal protections, any biohazard protections. And most importantly, if you have a resubmission, You want to make sure that you're addressing previous reviewers' concerns. All of these are factored into the score of your application. And in particular, reviewers don't like it when people ignore previous reviewers' comments. So you want to make sure that you address those. And then there is a section of additional review considerations. Now, these are things that we'd like input on. These are part of your application, but they do not factor into the overall score that your application will receive. And that includes the resource sharing plan, which is now just the model organisms and research tools, the authentication of key biological and chemical resources. We'll be looking for that. The budget and period of support. We're looking for comments on that. And for some of the RFAs, you also have an attachment called intellectual property and regulatory strategy. And we will be receiving reviewer comments on that, but those sections do not factor into your overall score of the application. All right, next slide. So just to transition, again, we have the 5 RFAs. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail on RFA 23-10, Enabling Technologies and Transformative Platforms, which is an R33 2-year grant. And Manoj will continue on with the Catalyze Product Definition RFAs and finish off the presentation. So next slide. So for enabling technologies, I'm not going to read all of this. This is all cut and paste from the RFA, but we are looking for, as it says, technologies or transformative platforms. And because it's an R33, we are looking for applications where the major feasibility gaps have already been overcome. And that is demonstrated in your application by the supportive preliminary data that you provide. And of course, we're looking for things that will accelerate or transform various areas of science. Next slide. And that is under purpose of the RFA. The objectives of the RFA also taken straight from the RFA. We're looking for novel capabilities. We're not looking for incremental improvements. You need to have a rigorous study design and well-defined performance measures. Next slide. So in this particular RFA, we have a second related notice that is very important. And this related notice is NOTE HL23-010. And that related notice, if you click on that, you'll get to the following section of RFA 2310 is modified by removing the language. And the following language is the milestone timeline and project management plan. The file name should be used and the attachment may not exceed 3 pages. So this related notice removes that language from your RFA. So if you go to the next slide, so the RFA becomes Section 4, Application and Submission Information. Under Research Strategy, we remove the requirement for a project management plan and an attachment, and the milestones, timeline, and project management sections become integrated into the research strategy. So we've changed the requirement for the RFA with this related notice. And so so if you went ahead after this notice was published and sent an application in with the file name attachment of the milestone timeline project management plan and did not incorporate it into your research strategy, you may have the possibility that it's withdrawn before review because you're not following the most current instructions. So that just shows again the importance of the related notices and making sure that you understand what's all in them. Next slide. So my last slide on this RFA is again paying attention to the wording. And these are just excerpts of some of the things from this RFA. The application budgets must not exceed $300,000 in direct costs per year. And of course, that budget does not include any matching funds. It's just 300,000 direct cost. The maximum project period is 2 years. Within the research strategy, there must be a dedicated subsection labeled performance measures. Under other attachments, there's a statement of potential impact which is required. And the file name statement of potential impact should be used. So if you do have an attachment, but you don't use that file name, we won't send it back to you because it says it should be used. But you need to have an attachment that says it's required. And so these are the things we'll be looking for as we do an administrative review of applications that come into us. And just make sure that you know the RFA and you're following all the instructions. And I believe the next slide is passing along to the product definition FOAs. Manoj.
Thank you, Chris. So I will go through the remaining 4 RFAs in the product definition part. So just before going through, it's like, since it's like 4 RFAs, I try to put it into 2 different buckets. Like one is like a drugs and biologics, and the other one is device and diagnostics. As you can see here, drugs and biologics are having 2 different RFAs, 23011 and 23012, and device and diagnostics are having 23013 and 23014. So as you can see here, definitely they are not supported for like a clinical trials because no clinical trials allowed with these RFAs. But there are 2 different type of mechanisms for each drugs and biologics and device and diagnostics. I will just go through that in the next coming slides. Next slide, please. So the overarching goal of these Catalyze RFAs, product definition RFAs, I'm just going one by one with the drugs and biologics. As you can see here, there are like the main objective is like coming as like a 3-part. It's like in the novelty, because this is something which NHLBI is looking for. What are the significant improvements it is doing with the specific applications for our existing therapeutics, because it's like a product development path. The main goal is just a translation science. The end of the application process, like once it is awarded, like coming into kind of fruition, it need to go into the next phase for like a preclinical phase or like IND kind of specific phase. So there need to be an end goal. It's not like a real basic science research. So it's more of a translational science, taking from bench to bedside kind of process. So with the drugs and biologists, that is the main thing which is like as an overarching goal, along with the preliminary data, because all the applications expected to have the preliminary data. Either it can be from the literature or maybe from other sources, or even from investigator generated data. But that is something which is key, because this is like some kind of far-reaching goal actually for kind of any kind of funding mechanisms. Then definitely this need to be relevant for the therapeutic development, because there is some NHLBI mission specific therapies which we will be looking from the NHLBI kind of perspective. So you need to see that where you are putting your product of development, whether it is meeting the expectations from the NHLBI mission or relevant therapies. Next slide, please. So that's the same case with the device and diagnostics. Its only difference is like it has to be something with some devices and diagnosis assay development. So the concept is same, novelty, preliminary data, as well as relevance for the development. So once you have that kind of thoughts, if you have a product in mind, or like you have some product to be developed, you just try to decide whether it is falling in the drugs and biologics or maybe the device and diagnosis. So once you have that answer, then you can go to the next phase. Next slide. To see like which kind of mechanism I can take, why I'm telling is there are 2 different mechanisms for each drugs and biologics as well as device and diagnostics with these 4 RFAs. So with R61, R33, that is one mechanism, because it's a biphase. I will go to the next slide like after this, but to give like an overview, there are 2 different RFAs, 011 and 013. One is for drugs and biologics and other one is device and diagnostics. But as an applicant, what we are requesting you to do is know your RFA. Know your FOA, read your FOA in such a way that you will not be missing the critical application informations, because there are some must and required elements with each FOA which need to be like otherwise it may not go to peer review. So we don't want you to miss those elements. So please read your FOA in detail in such a way that you can get the help what you want. So if you want help, definitely you can try to reach out to the program offices, but reading the FOA will clear up a lot of information. This will help you, but this is not complete. Actually, whatever we are trying to do here, we are trying to help you through, but definitely as an applicant, it's your responsibility to read your FOA and try to understand what are the expected elements within your application. Next slide, please. So to delineate like what to give a broad spectrum, it's not like the complete spectrum I'm giving, it's like the broad spectrum. R61, R33 applications are biphasic. So what is a biphasic? That means there is like R61 element and there is an R33 element. From the R61 element, some experiments or any kind of studies which you are just proposing in your application need to be done, and it need to be phased as to R33. So there is a checkpoint. That is why it's called milestone driven. So there are some kind of expected whatever you are proposing in your application need to be met before moving into R33. So before moving to R30, there is a programmatic review which will just be done at NHLBI, and will be evaluating and will decide whether it has to go to the next phase. That's why it's called biphasic. But basically, it's exploratory or developmental research, not like the real basic research, but it has a goal in mind. Whatever you are proposing need to go to the bench to bedside kind of process. So in the case of drugs and biologics, 011, that is a RFA. So maximum project period is for 3 years. And there are 2 phases, R61 phase and R33 phase, which I just put like what are the details, which can go to maximum 2 years, but you cannot exceed more than 3 years. So that means it can be 1+2 or 2+1 kind of. That's your call, actually, where you are just seeing your product, how far you reach to that kind of end stage, like whether you are in the stage to propose only R33 or R61. That's your call. That's the same case with the device and diagnostics. Maximum is 3 years. There will be 2 elements, R61 phase and R33 phase. But the major difference between these drugs and biologics and device and diagnostics RFAs are like, so the budget. For drugs and biologics, the budget cap is $350K per year, but for the device and diagnostics, it's a $250K per year. That's a major difference between these 2 RFAs for R61, R33 applications. And definitely R60, there are 2 elements I told, like R60 and R33, they cannot be awarded in the same fiscal year because this is a phased award. It has to be done in a fiscal year. So if you are proposing 1 year for R61 and 2 years for R33, there should be that kind of separation. You cannot do like 1.5. You cannot do that because there is no way it will be getting evaluated. So it's try to avoid that so that you will be having a better chance to review it properly, and the reviewers will be just scoring it nicely, actually. Go to the next slide. So regarding the R33, that's the next set of applications. The same way, drugs and biologics and device and diagnosis, 2 different RFAs, 012 and 014. Here also, I'm just reiterating, please read your FOA, try to understand what are the expectations within the FOA for a critical application element so that it will be going the peer review process. Just to reiterate, no clinical trials allowed. Next slide, please. So some of the key components in R33 applications, it's a single phase because the previous one was a biphase, there were 2 phases, but here you are trying to go directly into the R33 phase. So that means the application will be having a product which can go to the single phase kind of approach. So that is an applicant call, whether you are in that kind of process to go directly into R33. If you need any help, definitely reach out to the program offices, guide through. And there are some expectations if you are directly going to R33. The one thing is like it's only for 2 years. The next thing is like you need to have that your lead compounds identified or like whether it's going to the preclinical stage. So there are some kind of expectations going to far-reaching kind of goal. Budget for the drugs and biology, same thing, $350K per year. For device and diagnosis, $250K per year. And there is an added element here. there is an expected matching funds from the FOA itself. So the expectation is a 25% non-federal match, which is a need, which is like an expected need actually, So, but definitely that is something which you need to pay attention to these R33 applications. Next slide, please. So once you decide which path you need to go with the drugs and biologics or device and diagnosis, which mechanism you have to go, R61, R33 or R33 alone, then it's pretty much like a straightforward. You can prepare an application with the standard procedures, but there are some specific elements which is required from this FOA specific needs, which I will go through the coming slides. So the main thing is like a specific aim, a one-page limit specific aim. Since if you have R61, R33 element, definitely try to phase them out. The specific aims need to be like address R61, R33. Why we are telling this is when it is going to peer review process, it need to be in a readable format. It to be easy to read, because when the reviewer sees if there is like a lot of cross match in between these applications whenever it's written, it is too much confusing. We see that because that will really impact your score. So we are trying to help you to make it like more structured. If you can do that, it is always good. Then with research strategy, there is a page limit, 12 pages. There also describe your phases, 2 different phases separately in such a way that is more readable and understandable. And of course, there should be an evidence for unmet medical need, because this is product development actually. So the expectation is to go to the next phase as a preclinical or maybe pre-IND or IND kind of phase. Then if there is any history of product development disease area, of course, that has to be captured. The novelty of the design, summary of project status, rationale for experiment design and path forward. These are like common elements, but still then it need to be in a product development path. You need to just describe that will really help the reviewers to evaluate your applications in such a way that it will be getting a better score, whatever you are expecting. Next slide. So along with that, in the strategy specific to this FOA, there are some additional elements. So there is an accelerator partner need for the R33 phase. So this is just to see as I mentioned, this is a product development path. So you need to have somebody to be partner with you to make this product into fruition actually. So there is some kind of element which I will just let you know on the coming slides, and for sure the milestones. So all these product definition applications are milestone driven. Whether it is R61 or R33, you need to have the milestone, but milestones are not specific aims. Specific aims may or may not have multiple milestones. So milestones should be relevant, measurable, feasible, scientifically justified, results focused, as well as time bound. So try to understand what exactly is a milestone and try to capture it in such a way that the reviewers will be getting the things what they are looking for. And the timeline is running along with the milestone. What timeline you will be just you are going to capture these milestone with a specific time. So they're running together actually. That's the same way as a project management, because all these elements are becoming a part of the research strategy. So end of the research strategy, you need to find space to put all these details so that it will be getting reviewed and it is really affecting the research strategy criterion score. And for sure, rigor and reproducibility, because that's all part of all the grant applications. You need to just give a solid evidence for why this science is standing out in the field. Next slide. To add on with the budget justification, for sure there is budget justification part with the application. You need to describe what are the funds will be getting used. In the case of R33 phase, the expectation is there is a budget justification description of how these matching funds will be used for. There is no need for a proof of matching funds during the application, but if you have, definitely try to put it there. It will really help you to get a better peer review process actually. Then one key element I need to just point out is IP and regulatory strategy. Chris already mentioned that. This is a required attachment for all the product definition applications. These 4 RFAs actually, because since this is a product development path, so there may not be an IP, there may be an IP, there may not be a real regulatory strategy process in place, but what are your plans, whether it's an initial plan, preliminary plans, whatever it is, put this as an attachment, one-page IPM regulatory strategy. So to see that where you are planning to take this product into the next phase. So this is just to give that kind of sense how serious the application is. So please do not forget this, this attachment in your applications. Then appendices, no required appendices. Next slide. So to just give that kind of sum with this application process, as I told, like for our R61, R33, there are some expected requirements. For sure, IPM regulatory side is a requirement. Others are like need to pay special attention with the 350K as well as 250K, that kind of budget cap. And the budget specification if for R33 is expected to have the cost matching budget justification. For the R33 application, the expectation is little more because that is little far forward. IPM regulatory strategy along with the budget cap, whatever is the expectation within the FOA, then accelerated partner with the letter of support, cost matching with the budget justification, and letter of support for cost sharing. So these are some required elements. I'm not saying like required, but these are like expected elements within the application. But IPM regulatory side is a requirement, but pay special attention to these kind of must and required kind of elements into your application. What happens is if this, if the application is not complete during the initial review process, that means the administrative review, your application may not go into peer review if something is like really not addressed or like missing or something like so. So please pay special attention to these kind of requirements, or maybe like a must or required kind of elements within your application. Next slide. Okay, so this is nutshell of like with these 4 RFAs and how these applications can be like outlined, how the applications can be written in such a way that you will not be missing the peer review process. It will go to the peer review. Once the peer review process is done, like how it is done, like so I'll go just to start with the after your submission. Like once you just finish up the application, you submit, so it will go directly into the division of receipt and referral at the Center for Scientific Review at NIH. Upon receipt, all applications will be evaluated for the completeness and the compliance with the application instructions. And at NHLBI, we'll be looking for the responsiveness as well as other administrative elements. And this will be evaluated. And if any applications that are incomplete, non-compliant, or non-responsive will not be going to the peer review process. So to make sure that when you just submit your application, you have a window of time, maybe like a couple of days to review for the completeness. So do not miss that window so that your application will not be administratively withdrawn. Next slide. So once this is like going into the peer review process, after this completeness or responsiveness, everything is like done. Once it is going to the review process, there are like a two-tier review process in NIH and NHLBI. In this case, there is an initial level of review by a special emphasis panel, which will be done in our office at NHLBI Office of Scientific Review. What we are trying to evaluate the scientific and technical merit of each application and the likelihood for the project to extend a sustained powerful influence of the field. So this is done by a special emphasis panel report reviewers. Then the second level will be done at an advisory council level, NHLBI advisory council level, and that will be happening only after the first SEP meeting actually. Then what are the factors which is involved in considering in making the funding decisions? So there are multiple factors. One is like for sure scientific and technical merit of the proposed project. That is like your priority scores after the peer review process. Then along with that, availability of funds. Applications will compete for available funds with all of the recommended applications submit and response. So there is like competing process. Then what is the relevance of the proposed project in program priorities? Actually, that's depending upon whether it is meeting the NHLBI mission specific and how these are all coming in the later stages after the advisory council. So it's like a two different process. So we are mainly focusing on the first review process. That's the initial level of a special emphasis panel. The next slide, please. So in the special emphasis panel, this is not standing study sections. So all the reviewers will be invited reviewers depending upon the applications which is coming in that specific panel. And the reviewers will be recruited based on their scientific expertise, product development experience, translation research, entrepreneurs, and users. So it's like a battery of reviewers, I can say, because we will try to recruit the reviewers in such a way that this application, specific application of interest, will be reviewed with the relevant expertise what we can. And of course, when the panel is set, the reviewers will be having a pre-review orientation where scientific review officers will just go through the process of the program, will go through the process and try to see like what this RFA is meant for. And we will just, most of the people are like experienced reviewers. Till then, we will do this as a routine practice so that the review panel will be really aware of the specific needs for the specific RFA or FOA. So the review meeting will be like done in a very meticulous way. Next slide, please. So after the review process is done, like during the review meeting, like all the applications may not discuss during the review, so it all depends on the priority, the preliminary scores which is getting into the applications. So whatever the applications are getting discussed during the process, they will get a score from 10 to 90, or whatever is not discussed, you will get a notation like ND, not discussed. All the applications coming in the peer review process will get summary statement along with the criterion scores of the assigned reviewers. And after the review meeting is done, you need to contact your scientific, after the statement, summary statements is released, an applicant need to contact a scientific program officer for any kind of feedback or any kind of questions. And funding decisions will be done only after the advisory council meeting. And if you have any plan to come for a resubmission, definitely plan for the next cycle that is coming as a resubmission A1 application. Next slide. So before we wrap up, like I just need to give some kind of thoughts. So this is like me and Chris, like with our own review meetings, what we done so far. These are some of the comments which we are getting from the reviewers from our own perspective as well as the reviewer perspective, I can say. So make sure your application is clearly organized and easy to read, because when the reviewer is reading, like they're spending their own time to read the applications and come up with this best critics, whatever they can. So if the application is like a very messy and it's not organized properly, so you will be losing that kind of, they will be losing the momentum and you will be using the credibility. And so you just make sure that your application is readable, understandable, and organized. For sure, any figure legends need to be readable, because reviewers may not spend too much time to just read the lines in between the lines. So just give the font size enough labels. So please pay special attention to that. And regarding the human subjects, in this case, clinical trials are not allowed. Still, then you may have some human samples, and definitely the vertebrate animals may be there. Those sections need to be really addressed well enough so that it should match the research strategy. Whatever we are proposing, the research strategy need to be like resembling into the vertebrate animal sections what we are proposing. So don't miss those kind of points. So these are some comments which we are getting from the reviewers whenever we do this review process. For sure, for resubmission, Chris already mentioned that, please try to address almost all of these reviewers' comments. Even if it's not addressable, you need to try to address it. So do not ignore, because when you ignore, that may affect, I'm not saying that will, that may affect the review process when they do the review. If you have any FDA communication, it's maybe like the early stages, if you have any pre-IND or pre-IND or any kind of agency communications, if you have, try to include that so that will give you some kind of edge over your applications. Then some of the remaining things are like grantsmanship issues. Citation should match up with the reference list. Make sure bias status match the application. Beware of cut and paste errors, because whenever you cut and paste, it should match the application. It should be within the same kind of a RFA or maybe FOA elements. Then definitely milestones, read more like specific aims. That's some of the comments which we are getting. So please pay attention to that. Milestone should be milestone, not like specific aims. It should be like a measurable. Then another one is for R33 applications, because for R30 application, they need to be like a little far forward, right? But if you don't have any preliminary data, and if you are just trying to do with the R33, definitely they say, the reviewers are saying that it should be an R61, R33, not like R33. So try to define like where do you want to put your application. So once you define this, definitely program officers will be able to help you through, but try to make up that point before submitting your application. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you have any questions regarding the process before submission and after peer review, so that means before you do your application process and after the peer review meeting is done, please contact scientific program officers. During the after submission and during the up to the peer review meeting process, definitely you can contact us. Me and Chris are available. These are our contacts. Before that or after the review meeting, please try to reach out to the program officers. They can help you through the process. So that is pretty much I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj, and thank you, Kristen. We will move into the Q&A portion now. We did get several questions in the Q&A window. The first one is a two-parter from Melinda. Do the milestones go within the specific aims section? And as I understand, each specific aim will have an associated milestone or milestones.
So the milestones are, it would be, you certainly have the milestones based on specific aim. And then at the end, we ask for the timeline with the milestones there. So yes, you can include your milestones as you go through with your specific aims. And then at the end, have a summary with the milestones with your timeline.
Okay, next person joined late, so apologies if this was covered, but are small businesses allowed to submit?
Of course, yes.
Okay, our next question, please expand on data sharing plans for Catalyze applications from startup small businesses that may need strict data confidentiality in order to achieve ultimate big pharma support for pivotal clinical trials.
Well, all we ask is that you explain, if you're not able to share, you explain why. So you are allowed to not share if there is a good rationale, and that would be your plan. And so we ask you to share what you can, but we understand that some things are confidential.
Okay, are there word length recommendations for each part of the research strategy, or is it just what makes sense with our application?
Right, fit in the 12 pages. However you want to split it up is you know what makes best sense for you. But try to address all of the issues, all of the review criteria, things like that.
Okay, as we're moving through the questions, please note that we did open our feedback poll for today's webinar. So as we're going through these, please take a moment to provide your feedback. The next question we have from Alyssa, can you have an R33 and preclinical services award at the same time?
Can I defer to Diana for that answer?
So we do have some investigators that came in as product definition and are now receiving preclinical services. So there is an overlap. Typically, you're not applying for both at the same time. You may have come in under product definition, and then your product is now moved towards preclinical services. So while you're wrapping up your product definition, you may be able to get preclinical services. Now, of course, that's only assuming we're talking about the same product. If it's a company applying for two different projects, And they could certainly have an R33 and a preclinical services at the same time for different projects.
Okay, next question from Melvin. Where in the R33 application should the milestones and timeline and project management sections appear?
It will be the end of the research strategy, because it's part of the research strategy actually. Or even for R61, R33 and R33, it should be a part of the research strategy, because that's going to get evaluated based on that. So end of the research strategy, you can capture that.
Next question, is the PI responsible for project management?
Not
We
just ask that you name somebody. If the PI can handle that on top of everything else, that's fine, but we just ask that somebody is designated to be responsible for that person.
Can I jump in there and just say that we're strongly encouraging PIs to not be the project manager? We want to have a separate person.
Can universities only apply without small businesses or without small business?
Yes, definitely.
Let's see. Do matching funds have to come from startup?
not necessarily actually, even if it is from the universities anywhere, like I think it can be from anywhere, right, Mike?
Non-federal sources, what it says in the
Non-federal
RFA.
sources, yeah, exactly.
Okay, next question. Are equipment purchase costs and graduate student support allowed in the R33 budget?
I've never seen that they're not. I don't recall that in the budget information. So I would say yes, but we do also, one group of people I didn't mention here was the grants management office, and we do have a specific grants management person that does Catalyze, and they deal with a lot of the budget issues. So if you do have budget questions before submission, that would be great to contact any of us really, and we'll get you in touch with the right person.
Okay, are priority scores given percentiles?
No, they are not percentiles like they are in CSR.
Can you say more about the accelerator partner?
Maybe I'll jump in here. So the accelerator partner is someone outside of the academic research enterprise or universities who can help with business development and business development skills within your location or regionally. And we have a lot of flexibility on what an accelerator partner means. So if you have a CRO, for example, that has a venture arm, that counts. A lot of universities now have innovation offices, and they can certainly be listed as the accelerator partner.
Okay, I do see one more question in the final minute that we have here, and apologies to everyone. It looks like the poll was closed prematurely, but it is reopened. So if you wouldn't mind putting your feedback there. Is there anything additional that we can include in the appendix?
Typically, these applications don't have things that would go into the appendix. I have had people accidentally put things in the appendix that should have been in other attachment. So if you are thinking of doing that, I would contact somebody first. Appendices are not generally accessible to reviewers, and it's not guaranteed that reviewers will even look at whatever's in the appendix.
Okay, so we are at the top of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining today.
Oh, I do see one more question here from Sai.
Yeah, okay. For device study, can product refinement based upon early human subject experiments and biocompatibility testing be part of R61 portion of a R63, R33 application?
Well, I would definitely suggest you contact a scientific program officer in the field that you're looking at here. But we certainly have those types of studies in the grant applications, but I would definitely suggest that.
Okay, I think we're out of time today. So once again, the recording and slides will be posted on the Catalyze website within a few days following today's webinar. But thank you everyone for your attendance and have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.